Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really jumping into something quite demanding intellectually, but I think ultimately pretty liberating too. We're exploring Martin Heidegger's whole analysis of human existence, what he calls Dasein.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't just dry theory, is it? It feels more like a toolkit, something to help you fundamentally rethink, well, your own life, how you understand time, even mortality.
That's absolutely right. And the sources we're drawing on here, they really guide us away from, the traditional path in Western philosophy.
Yeah.
Usually it's about defining what a human is, the rational animal, a soul, some kind of conscious substance.
Right, the standard definitions.
Exactly. But Heidegger's approach is just fundamentally different. Our mission today is really to dig into this unique type of being, Dasein, which is structured fundamentally by the very fact that it asks the question of being.
Okay. So the asking is the key part.
It is. It's about the being that asks.
And the relevance for you listening in is, well, it's pretty immediate, I think. Heidegger gives us this intricate framework that kind of dismantles that old, isolated view of the self, the mind floating free somewhere.
Yeah, the Cartesian view.
Exactly. And he replaces it with a concept that's inherently temporal, inherently contextual. So by diving deep into these really foundational ideas, we're kind of getting a shortcut, maybe, to understanding the self not as some static thing, but as this active, ongoing, very conditional process. Let's try and unpack this. It's a big one.
It is. Where do we start?
Okay, let's begin right at the beginning, the absolute center of this philosophy, Dasein. The literal translation is something like being there, right?
Hippie, yeah.
Being there. But in Heidegger, it's specifically the human being. So what makes Dasein more than just, another object or entity in the world?
Well, consciousness is part of it, but it's not just the ability to think, like Descartes might say. Dasein is unique. It's the only entity that actually relates to its own being as a question.
Oh.
It's the being that's aware it exists, aware it's finite, and is constantly sort of probing the meaning of its existence and, well, the existence of everything else around it. Our sources put it quite starkly. Dasein is defined as the being whose being is a question. And this self-questioning isn't just something we sometimes do. It's unavoidable. It's an essential part of the structure of being human.
So we don't just exist like a rock or a tree exists. We exist in a way that our existence is always sort of open for negotiation, reflection, change.
Exactly.
If the definition of a chair is fixed, ours is this ongoing inquiry into ourselves.
Precisely. And that connects directly to this idea of existence as possibility. For Heidegger, existence isn't some fixed state we're in. It's a continuous projection, always leaning into possible futures. Dasein is constantly defining itself through its existence as a possibility.
A possibility.
Yeah, the choice to be or not to be that possibility. We're always relating to our potential, our ambitions, maybe our regrets too, and definitely what we might become. The very core of existence is this kind of future-leaning tension towards possibility.
That feels incredibly dynamic, almost restless. We're defined by what we might be, not just what we are right now. Okay, so if existence is rooted in possibility, what's the fundamental essence, the underlying the bit, as the sources say, what underpins this constant state of projection and self-making?
Right.
The sources define this fundamental structure as care, Sorge.
Yes, and this is where we really need to pause, because Sorge is, well, it's one of the most easily misunderstood concepts.
Because care sounds emotional, like worrying.
Exactly. It gets translated literally as care or worry, and immediately people think psychologically. But for Heidegger, care Sorge is a foundational ontological state.
Ontological, meaning part of the structure of being itself.
Precisely. It's the comprehensive a priori structure. It comes before and is already in every single state or mood or action of Dasein. It's not an emotion we feel sometimes. It's the basic structural unity of our being in the world.
Okay, so if I'm listening, I might be thinking, how does this big ontological care show up in my everyday life? How is it different from me just, worrying about paying the bills?
That's a fair question. The difference is really one of scale and necessity. Worrying about the bills is a specific, empirical manifestation of care.
Yeah.
A particular instance. But ontological care, Sorge, is the fundamental necessity of relating to the world at all. Wow. It's the structure that holds together three key things.
Yeah.
Our facticity, the fact we're already thrown into a world.
Okay, our given situation.
Right. Then our existentiality, our projection into possibilities, the future-oriented part we just talked about. And finally, our fallenness, our tendency to kind of get lost in the everyday hustle, the immediate present. Sorge is the umbrella term for how Dasein holds all those tensions together, its past, its present interactions, its future possibilities.
I see. So it's like the glue that binds us to our context, to our environment, to other people.
It is.
If our fundamental state is care, then we can't not be relational. We're defined not by some detached reason floating above it all, but by our active engagement with the world, with things, tools, projects, and critically, other Dasein.
Exactly. Defining our fundamental essence as care just immediately throws out centuries of thinking about the human as a detached, purely rational observer. It forced us to see ourselves as engaged beings whose understanding of who we are is always tangled up with the things and people we care for or care about.
And that realization that we're inherently relational, that must be why Heidegger felt he had to challenge the existing philosophical traditions so strongly.
It's the critical step. It forces a reevaluation of everything that came before.
Right. So to properly establish this unique view of Dasein defined by care, Heidegger knew he couldn't just add it to the existing philosophical structure. He had to, dismantle parts of it first. He uses this really striking term, the destruction of ontology, specifically targeting the Aristotelian Thomistic tradition. That word destruction sounds pretty aggressive. What did he actually mean by it?
Yeah, destruction is definitely a word that grabs your attention.
Yeah.
But it can be a bit misleading. It's not about just tearing everything down like philosophical vandalism or rejecting history outright.
Okay.
The sources make it clear it's more of a systematic, historical deconstruction.
Yeah.
He's carefully taking apart the jargon, the specific concepts and vocabulary that built up over centuries.
Concepts like?
Things like substance, essence, accident. These became fixed, rigid categories. And Heidegger felt they actually ended up obscuring the original fundamental question. What does it mean to be?
So it's less like demolition and more like scraping away layers of old paint to get to the original surface, or clearing rubble to see the foundations.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah. He talks about needing to filter out complex metaphysical ideas like you mentioned, Nietzsche's eternal recurrence or Aristotle's concept of energy, actuality, being at work.
Why were those specific historical concepts a problem for understanding Dasein?
Because they tended to treat being itself as if it were a kind of super entity, something constant, permanent. Or they reduced the question of being to just classifying the types of things that exist within the world.
They mistook the characteristics of existing things for the meaning of existence itself.
Exactly. They confused the what with the that it is and how it is. The whole point of this destruction project is to try and return philosophy to that original sense of wonder, that root understanding of being. Almost like going back to the questions the pre-Socratics were asking, before all these categories became, philosophical dogma.
Right, before the answers became more important than the questions.
Precisely. By taking apart the old jargon, he's trying to establish the limit of metaphysical truth, to figure out where traditional philosophy essentially stopped asking the really crucial questions about being itself.
Okay, so this philosophical ground clearing is needed to rethink even our most basic concepts, like truth. We're usually taught that truth means correspondence, right? A statement is true if it accurately matches up with something out there in the world.
The standard definition. My statement, the cat is on the mat, is true if indeed the cat is on the mat.
But Heidegger says it's not fundamental enough.
He finds it insufficient, yeah. Because that kind of correspondence, truth, is always secondary. It's an empirical statement about entities that already exist and have already been revealed to us. For Heidegger, truth, in its more primary sense, he uses the Greek word aletheia, is something much more fundamental.
Aletheia. That means?
Unconcealment or disclosure. Truth, for Heidegger, is the very act of disclosure. It's the event where things are revealed to Dasein, brought out of hiddenness into the open.
Wait a second. If truth is an act of disclosure, an event that happens through existence, how does he stop truth from just becoming totally subjective? True for me might not be true for you. Does it lead to relativism?
That is the crucial question, absolutely. And Heidegger's answer is subtle. He argues that this disclosure doesn't just happen subjectively inside someone's head. It happens through Dasein's very structure as being in the world in der Weltsein.
Okay.
The truth is described as the presence of what is present in disclosedness.
Yeah.
And it refers to being as such. The world is disclosed, things are revealed, but they can only be revealed because Dasein is the unique kind of being that serves as the site, the location for this unconcealment to happen.
So Dasein doesn't create the truth,
No.
but it's the necessary clearing the open space where truth can appear.
Exactly. Dasein, the clearing the Lichtum, where being can show itself. Without Dasein, things would remain concealed.
Okay, this shift is huge. From truth as a property of statements to truth as an event of unconcealment. And if it's an event, that immediately brings us back to time. Truth happens in time.
Precisely. And the sources point out something critical here. Even the traditional concept of being already has a hidden temporal dimension. When we talk about being, we usually mean being in the present, presence, nowness, Sadeschust, as the source notes.
Right. We think of is as happening now.
But traditional ontology, when it tried to define time itself, tended to abstract it, to pull it away from this lived human experience.
Why did the old definitions like Aristotle's idea of time as just moments of motion measuring change, why did that fail for Heidegger?
It failed because it treats time as if it were just another entity or maybe a container that holds events. A series of neutral, measurable nows, completely independent of the being who experiences them. It treats time as something present at hand, like a tool we can pick up and use.
Like clock time.
Exactly. Clock time is a perfect example of this abstracted, objectified time. And this view, Heidegger argues, completely obscures the deep, fundamental relationship between being and time. If we ask, what is the now? We're already thinking of it as something present, something there.
Okay, so the old model wasn't cutting it. Heidegger needed something new. What the sources call his post-metaphysical poignancy of time.
Yes. He shifts perspective entirely. Time isn't an entity out there that we measure. Time is more like an instrument, or better yet, the very structure through which we grasp the temporal nature of being itself. And crucially, this understanding of time is derived entirely from analyzing the temporality of human Dasein.
So time isn't a river we're floating in.
No.
It's more like the structure of our own potential, our own history, our own present engagement. We don't exist in time. Dasein is, in a sense, time or the source of meaningful time.
You've got it. That's the radical inversion. Dasein's existence comes first, and it structures our understanding of time, not the other way around. Time flows from Dasein, not the other way around.
Okay, so these massive shifts in defining truth and time, they necessitate an equally radical rethinking of the self. You mentioned Descartes earlier. Heidegger really takes aim at that Cartesian dualism, the idea of the I, as just a thinking thing, the res cogitans. Why did Heidegger, maybe like Hegel before him in some ways, feel the need to reject I think, therefore I am, cogito ergo sum?
The fundamental problem with the Cartesian self, for Heidegger, is its isolation. It portrays the human being as this disembodied intellect, a mind existing almost in a philosophical vacuum, fundamentally separate from the world out there.
Right.
And this view implies that knowledge comes mainly from looking inward, from introspection.
Yeah.
And that our connection to the external world is somehow secondary, maybe even unreliable. Heidegger just says ontologically this is false. It doesn't match how we actually are. The human state, he insists, is fundamentally a non-reducible, contextualized state of a being. We are not a mind that just happens to be linked to a body which happens to be near some objects. Our involvement is primary and practical.
Yeah, the idea of the isolated mind always struggled with simple things like using a hammer. The Cartesian mind would have to, calculate trajectory, force, resistance.
Exactly. It becomes absurdly complex.
Whereas we just pick up the hammer and hit the nail. We're already engaged.
Precisely. Our primary way of being in the world isn't detached intellectual contemplation. It's practical engagement, dealing with things. So Heidegger throws out those dualistic concepts, subject versus object, consciousness versus world, and replaces them with this single, unified existential concept, being in the world, Interweltsein.
And it's hyphenated for a reason, right? To show it's one unified thing.
Yes, the hyphens are crucial. The in isn't spatial like water is in a glass. It's ontological. It means being involved with, being familiar with, dwelling within.
Okay, so what does Interweltsein really tell us about our consciousness then?
It signifies the fundamental openness of Dasein toward the world. The world isn't something separate that consciousness looks at. Rather, our very existence is constituted by our relationships within the world. The world understood as this whole network, this totality of relations between entities.
So consciousness isn't detached from its objects?
Never. Our unity, the unity of our existence, involves active, practical participation in our environment. We are necessarily an innerworldly being. We're structured by the tools we use, the language we speak, the social norms we navigate, the physical spaces we inhabit, the hammer, the keyboard, the traffic laws, the cultural expectations. These aren't external objects. They are part of the very fabric of Dasein.
This focus on context, on location, seems embedded right there in the name Dasein. The da, the there, or here. The sources mention the importance of this too. What does that location, that here-ness, specifically point to?
The tu, or da, marks the essential disclosedness, Wesenhafte Erschlossnheit, of our being. It signifies the fact that Dasein finds itself here, set here, there, simply by virtue of existing.
It's the starting point.
It is. This disclosedness is the clearing we talked about, the illumination of being that Dasein provides. We didn't choose to be here, born in this specific century, in this culture, speaking this language, but that here-ness, that concrete situation, is the raw material for all our possibilities. The two highlights our fundamental contingency, our situatedness.
And because we're situated here, we're almost never here alone. We're automatically situated with others. Which brings us to the social dimension. Mit-Dasein, being with others, existing within a Mitwelt, co-world. How does Heidegger understand this unavoidable relationship with other people?
Right. Being Dasein is already being Mit-Dasein. We exist alongside others. And this relationship, this being with, is managed through another form of care. Fürsorge, which translates roughly as solicitude or care for.
Okay, so Sorge is the fundamental structure, and Fürsorge is how that care relates specifically to other Dasein.
Exactly. And like Sorge, it's not just an emotion, it's an existential mode of relating. Heidegger actually identifies two main modes of Fürsorge. One is, perhaps surprisingly, potentially destructive or inauthentic.
Oh, so?
This is when we sort of leap in and take over the other person's concerns, their tasks, their possibilities. We do things for them in a way that actually disburdens them of their own care.
So it looks like caring, like helping.
Right. It often presents itself as helpfulness.
But philosophically, it undermines their ability to be Dasein themselves. It takes away their choices.
Precisely. It can make them dependent, rob them of their own possibilities, their own need to project into the future. The second mode, the authentic mode of Fürsorge, is characterized by what the sources call consideration and patience.
Consideration and patience.
Yeah. This mode doesn't leap in to take over. Instead, it helps the other person to see and grasp their own possibilities. It leaps ahead to open up their potential, freeing them to take over their own care, to truly be Dasein in their own right. Authentic care enables the other's freedom and possibility. It doesn't dominate or replace it.
That's a really important distinction, and it's worth stressing that this world, the Welt in Innerweltsein and Mitwelt, is incredibly broad for Heidegger. The sources describe it as the world, in quotes, encompassing everything that is, was, will be, and could have been. That gives Dasein's relations a huge scope.
It really does. The world isn't just the sum total of physical objects around us. It's the whole horizon of meaningful connections, equipmental totalities, cultural significances, historical echoes, and future possibilities. Our existence is caught up in this vast web of relations, from ancient history to the project I'm planning for next week, from the hammer in my hand to the political climate I live in. And the stretcher of Dasein, unified by Sorge, is fundamentally about navigating this complex totality.
So, if Dasein is inherently contextual, relational, defined by care, its most defining feature has got to be time, temporality, Reminiscence. How does Heidegger's view of temporality really shake up our usual perception of existence?
It's a radical reorganization. Heidegger sees temporality as fundamentally ecstatic, which doesn't mean joyful, but rather means standing outside itself. The three dimensions or ecstasies of time, past, present, and future are not sequential points on a line, but are unified and interconnected in Dasein's being. And crucially for Heidegger, Dasein's time is primarily characterized by its orientation toward the future.
The future, more than the present.
Yes, our fundamental way of being is projection, anticipation. We're always ahead of ourselves, oriented towards our ambitions, dreams, goals, possibilities, what the sources describe as what might be. We are constantly striving towards something we are not yet. This future orientation is what gives the present its meaning and urgency.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this ecstatic structure, the present isn't just a fleeting now point between past and future. It's more like the active meeting place where the future pulls us forward and the past grounds us.
That's a great way to put it. The future is the towards which we project ourselves, our possibilities. The past isn't simply gone and over. The sources say it lasts. It's our facticity, our Geworfenheit or thrownness, the unchosen situation we come from that provides the already been structure we project from.
Okay.
The present moment, then, is the point of active engagement, the making present, where Dasein deals with the world, making choices based on the possibilities opened up by the future, all while carrying the weight of its past. But the primary emphasis, the driving force, is that pull towards the future, towards possibility.
That projection towards possibility has an ultimate limit, doesn't it? There's one possibility that structures and perhaps overshadows all others: death. The sources call death one of the thrown, predetermined possibilities that shapes Dasein's temporality.
This is arguably the most profound, maybe the most unsettling aspect of Heidegger's analysis, being towards death. Sensum tote. And the absolute first thing to grasp is that this is not primarily about the biological event of dying.
Not the empirical end.
No, it's not about the moment the heart stops. Sensum tote is an existential structure. It's a mode of life. It's about how we relate to our own inevitable end while we are alive. It's about living in the constant awareness of our finitude.
Why does he stress that death is non-relational? That seems key.
Because it's the one possibility that is utterly, uniquely mine. No one else can experience my death. No one can die for me in this existential sense. Death is the absolute most individualized possibility. And because of this, it establishes death as the horizon of human Dasein. Everything we are, everything we can possibly do or be, happens within the context of this ultimate boundary. Death, for Dasein, is the absolute impossibility of Dasein. It's the possibility of the impossibility of any further existence.
Wow. The possibility of impossibility. That sounds like a paradox.
It is a paradox, deeply so. Death is the possibility that negates all other possibilities. Heidegger points out that Dasein is determined for death from the moment it's born. Life is this constant state of not yet in relation to this ultimate end.
So it's not something waiting for us at the end of the line, but something that permeates our existence now.
Exactly. By recognizing death not just as some future event to be ignored or feared, but as an ever-present existential structure, my own most non-relational possibility, we are forced, or perhaps freed, to take ownership of our existence. If this end is certain, absolute, and non-transferable, then the possibilities I choose now, the way I live now, must be genuinely mine.
Okay, let's bring this down to the listener. If our whole sense of time is structured by this movement towards a possibility, the future, which culminates in an absolute impossibility, death, how does that realization radically redefine the value of the present moment, especially for someone maybe feeling stuck in the mundane?
It imbues the present with an almost unbearable weight, but also with immense value and urgency. The recognition of sensum tote, when faced authentically, strips away the trivial. The present moment becomes the only site of genuine choice and action. Because we are finite, because our time is limited by this horizon of nothingness, our choices matter profoundly. The awareness of death isn't meant to induce morbid paralysis. Heidegger intends it to be liberating. It should liberate us from distractions, from conforming, from postponing life.
It tells us, because I'm heading towards nothingness, the something I choose to be now must be defined authentically by me right now.
Precisely. It's the stark realization of our absolute finitude that throws open the possibility of a genuinely meaningful present. Without the horizon of death, choices might feel arbitrary, endlessly deferrable. With it, choices become precious, finite, and demand authentic commitment.
Okay, so this confrontation with mortality, with sensum tote, it seems to force a kind of split, a choice between two fundamental ways of existing, the authentic versus the inauthentic. Let's talk about the inauthentic first. The sources call it Uneigentlichkeit and say it often stems from Geworfenheit, thrownness.
Right, Geworfenheit, thrownness. This refers back to that idea of our starting point. It's the brute fact of the unchosen conditions we find ourselves born into.
Like
our specific historical period, our geographical location, our parents, our native language, the culture we're raised in, our initial socioeconomic situation, even the prevailing mood or spirit of the age, the zeitgeist. These are all things that were already in place before we had any say in the matter. Geworfenheit is the concrete fanticity of our existence.
It's the hand we're built, essentially, the arbitrary starting line. And the sources say that before Dasein can truly know its own being, it has to acknowledge this fundamental, unchosen, thrown state. Why does being thrown often lead towards inauthenticity, towards alienation?
Well, it can lead to alienation because confronting the sheer arbitrariness of our starting point can be deeply unsettling. There's a temptation to flee from it, to pretend we somehow chose it, or to simply ignore the weight of responsibility that comes with acknowledging our contingency. And the easiest way to flee is to fall into the anonymous, public way of being what Heidegger famously calls the they-self, or Das Man.
Das Man, they.
Exactly. Das Man represents the impersonal collective, the anonymity of public opinion, social norms, conventional wisdom. They say, one doesn't do that. Everyone knows.
Das Man sounds like the source of all the comfortable evasions, especially around difficult topics like death. When we talk about death in the abstract, oh, people die every day, or it happens to everyone eventually, that's Das Man talking, isn't it? Distancing ourselves.
Absolutely. Das Man relies heavily on what Heidegger calls idle talk das Gerede. This is chatter, gossip, superficial communication, where we discuss profound things like death as if it's just some neutral event that happens out there, an event that's not here now and doesn't really belong to anyone specific. By hiding our unique individuality within this amorphous day, we feel safer, less exposed, less responsible. But the cost is immense. We lose our capacity for authentic self-determination. We end up living according to the script written by what one does, dictated by the collective, rather than choosing based on our own unique possibilities discovered through confronting our finitude.
Okay, so that's the trap of inauthenticity, falling into the they. The crucial question then is, how do we break free? How does one pull themselves away from that comfortable, easy, but ultimately alienating anonymity? The sources point to a very specific, powerful catalyst: angst, anxiety.
Yes, angst. And again, like Sorge, we have to be careful with the translation. Angst is the key ontological mood or attunement, Befindlichkeit, that can jolt us out of this man. But it's fundamentally different from everyday fear. Furcht.
How so? Fear has an object, right? I'm afraid of the charging bear, of failing the exam, of the diagnosis.
Precisely. Fear is always directed towards a specific, definite entity or situation within the world. Angst, by contrast, is defined by Heidegger as fear without an object of fear. There's nothing specific in the world that causes it.
So what is it a fear of then? Or what triggers this objectless dread?
Angst arises when the world itself, the familiar context of our everyday dealings, suddenly loses its significance and seems strange, uncanny, meaningless. It's triggered when Dasein has a profound, visceral realization of its own Geworfenheit, the stark fact that it has been thrown into this particular, unchosen world adrift, with no ultimate ground or reason, only to face the certainty of its own eventual dissolution into nothingness.
The world loses its usual comfort and reliability.
Exactly. Because angst reveals the ultimate groundlessness of being itself. It reveals Dasein's absolute finitude, the contingency of its existence. An existence beautifully described in the sources as being like a spark that shines in the dark and extinguishes. It's the confrontation with the possibility of non-being itself.
That sounds terrifying, frankly. But you're saying this momentary, shocking confrontation with nothingness, that's what opens the path to freedom, to authenticity.
It is terrifying, yes,
Yeah.
but potentially liberating. Because this profound unease, this angst, severs the comforting link to Das Man. The collective they offers no solace when you're faced with your own unique non-being. The stark realization that no one can save us from our transition into nothing, as the sources put it, is precisely what forces us back onto ourselves, making us recognize our radical individuality and our inescapable responsibility for our own choices.
So the authentic Dasein isn't someone who eliminates anxiety,
No, not at all.
but someone who embraces this revelation, who faces death and mortality not as some distant problem, but as the defining, ever-present, inherent structure of their own being.
Exactly. Authentic Dasein accepts this finitude. It chooses its possibilities out of this awareness from a place of genuine selfhood, no longer primarily determined by the chatter and expectations of the they-self. Acceptance of mortality allows for authentic choice.
I appreciate that Heidegger doesn't just leave us hanging in this state of existential dread. He does suggest a way to navigate it, maybe even to mitigate the alienation that comes from thrownness. He points towards philosophy and art as special paths. What makes these practices unique in fostering authenticity?
He sees philosophy and art as having a unique capacity because they can induce a state of ecstasy. Again, not in the everyday sense of overwhelming joy, but in the philosophical sense of standing outside oneself.
Standing outside.
Yeah. In deep philosophical contemplation, or in the creation or profound reception of art, the individual can momentarily, the sources say, they can forget how mortal they are, and that they are even alive, that they exist in the manner of being.
Wow, that's quite a statement. So By engaging with these fundamental questions of being, or through the disclosure that art provides, we can somehow transcend the immediate pressures of our finite existence and the pull of Das Man.
That seems to be the idea. We engage with being itself, or with truth as unconcealment, aletheia, as it's revealed in art, rather than just getting caught up in the everyday concerns of entities, of the chatter of the they. Philosophy, by systematically questioning the very structure of existence, and art, by revealing truth in its own powerful way, can pull Dasein out of its everyday absorption and fallenness. They offer moments, perhaps glimpses, of authentic freedom, allowing Dasein to experience its own possibilities in a way that isn't dictated by the collective or overshadowed solely by the immediate dread of non-being.
This has been, well, it's been a really challenging, but I think incredibly rewarding dive into some very deep waters. If we try to synthesize the core thread here, Heidegger presents Dasein as this unique kind of being fundamentally structured by care, Sorge. This Dasein isn't isolated, but is always already being in the world, inseparable from its context, its thrownness, Geworfenheit.
Right.
And this whole dynamic structure is unified by temporality, a temporality primarily oriented towards the future, but which gets its ultimate boundary, its definitive horizon from being towards death, Sein zum Tode.
Exactly.
And the path towards living authentically rather than getting lost in the anonymous they-self, Das Man, is opened up by anxiety, angst, the unsettling awareness of our own finitude and groundlessness, which forces us to take responsibility for our choices.
That's a great summary. And the relevance today feels almost more potent than ever, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Think about Geworfenheit now in the age of social media and the internet. We're thrown into these curated digital realities, aren't we? Shaped by algorithms, echo chambers, relentless group norms that constantly tell us what's important, what's true, what success looks like, even what our possibilities should be.
The struggle against Das Man feels like the daily battle against this overwhelming digital groupthink, where genuine individual possibility feels constantly under threat from these massive impersonal forces defining meaning for us.
Absolutely. When we find ourselves just endlessly scrolling, doom scrolling, or just repeating the latest viral take without really thinking it through for ourselves, that's arguably a modern form of falling into Das Man.
Yeah, it's the path of least resistance.
It is. And Heidegger's challenge remains incredibly stark.
Yeah.
The moment we truly realize we're not just playing a role prescribed by the day, but are finite beings whose time is limited, whose end is certain, and whose possibilities are ultimately our own responsibility. That's the moment we can start reclaiming authenticity.
It demands a kind of radical self-confrontation, accepting the arbitrary nature of where we start and the non-negotiable reality of where we end.
Yes. It's only by facing that thrownness and that finitude, he suggests, that we can begin to genuinely care for our own existence, to make choices that are truly our own.
Which leaves us, and leaves you listening, with that ultimate, really provocative question Heidegger forces us to confront. If we accept that we are thrown into this world only to eventually face absolute negation, the transition into nothing, does that stark realization of nothing actually motivate us, paradoxically, to define our something, to live out our possibilities with genuine care? If death gives life its definitive edge, what are you doing with your time right now that reflects your unique, authentic possibilities? Something to